It's February, it's almost Valentine's Day, so let's do some romantic comedies and kick things off with Some Kind of Wonderful. Now, who doesn't like this movie? It's got Garbage Pail Kids, it's got DJ Tanner, it's got Sergeant Taggart, it's got Lorraine Baines, it's got punks, it's got skaters, and it's got that beautiful Suzuki Samurai JX. So grab your drumsticks and get ready, because today we're checking out filming locations for the 1987 John Hughes classic and one of the few John Hughes movies filmed right here in Los Angeles, Some Kind of Wonderful. Let's go see what we can find. During the opening credits of the movie, we see Keith walking along these train tracks that are located just south of what's now Harry Bridges Boulevard. But the thing is, everything here is different. The tracks are different. Those utility poles that used to run alongside of them are gone. There used to be a building right over there that said propane. That's gone. Everything here has changed. For a split second in the movie, you can see a street sign for Wilmington Boulevard, which would have been right here, but it no longer cuts all the way through. So pretty much the only thing here that tells us that this is the right stretch of tracks, besides the fact that the train tracks do curve to the left up ahead, just like they do in the movie. But other than that, pretty much the only thing we have is the refinery, and the shot that we get right here matches up exactly with what we see in the movie. On his way home, Keith decides to stop off at Amanda's house to do some creeping. He would have been standing right behind this utility pole watching Amanda as she's on her front porch saying goodbye to Hardy. After kissing him goodbye, Hardy hops over that wall and jumps into his black Corvette and drives off. I'm happy to report that this is one of those locations that looks almost identical to how it did in the movie. I can't believe it even still has the awnings over the windows, even though they are a different color, but it still looks almost exactly the same. Makes me really happy. Keith crosses the street going to his house, and we see the refinery in the background and this apartment building. Both are very noticeable in that shot. He passes by all the neighboring houses before heading up the driveway to his house. And this right here was Keith's house, and the home itself, the structure, is pretty much unchanged. It's got a lot more trees and bushes and this fence, but the actual house is unchanged. And pretty much every time they show Keith's house in the movie, they use that same shot with the camera panning across the street showing the refinery. Whether it's Keith walking home, or his sister riding her bike home, or Keith getting dropped off in the Suzuki Samurai. So this is San Pedro High, which stood in for San Paulo High in Some Kind of Wonderful. And San Pedro High has remained the same pretty much since 1935, but it's now completely under construction. They're remodeling the entire school, and a lot of the stuff that we see in Some Kind of Wonderful may not exist pretty soon. Now, I was able to find a lot of the locations I was looking for, but there were still a few scenes that I wasn't able to match up. And as you can see, construction's already started. They've already torn down a lot of buildings, and I have a feeling that's why I wasn't able to find those particular scenes. Right over here in front of the school, this is the area where Watts parks her car in the beginning of the movie. This used to be a parking lot, but as you can see, it's now gated off and covered with a tarp. They're now building something in there. And those school buildings that you can see across from Watts' car when she parks it, those are gone too. Those would have been over here, but they've since been torn down, and this is now a parking lot. And then right over there where they're now building some new structure, that was the parking area where Watts parks her car. So they would have walked through the front doors of the school right there, and then up these steps, and then headed out through these doors into this outdoor area, and that's where we first see Duncan. He would have put his foot up on that drinking fountain to block Keith and Watts from walking by, and Duncan would have been leaning up against this wall right here. And of course, when the altercation starts between Duncan and Keith, a teacher comes running through the doors right there, and we see some of Duncan's friends sitting up on top of this drinking fountain. This was the gas station that Keith worked at. It's now an auto shop, and it's kind of hard to see where everything was in the movie because the lot's so full of cars. But you can see right inside there where those garage doors are open, that's where Keith would have been working on the cars, and where Watts plays the drums on Keith's boss's car. And then right over here would have been the gas pumps where Hardy pulls up and Keith has to go pump the gas for Hardy and check the oil. And if he's not nice, he's gonna have to check the tires too. It's also right there in this garage where Watts and Keith have their first kiss. Watts pretends like she's just helping out Keith to make sure that him and Amanda have a good first kiss, but of course, Watts just wants to kiss Keith. After the kiss, she gets embarrassed and she goes walking off this way, and you can see her walk right past the legs of this billboard. On the street directly behind San Pedro High School, we see Hardy's black Corvette coming up the street right here and pulling over to drop off Amanda, and I'm surprised that he actually uses his turn signal when he pulls over. He would have dropped her off right here in front of this gate. However, things on the other side of this fence have changed quite a bit. Those basketball courts are no longer here. They're on the other side of the yard. The tennis courts are gone, and the bleachers have been moved and now face the other direction. So Hardy would have been parked right here. Amanda walks through that gate, and the way that we can really tell that this is the right spot is Keith is standing on top of the bleachers watching her get dropped off. And when we see that shot, we can see this house and this apartment building right next door. Amanda comes walking down these steps, and as the camera pans out, we see Hardy once again talking to another girl. Amanda and Hardy are standing right here arguing, and Hardy's denying the whole thing, and he pretty much tells Amanda, "What other choices do you have than to be with me?" But sitting right over here, Keith is waiting to talk to Amanda. Keith finally decides to make his move, and he stands up and he calls out to Amanda and asks if he can talk to her for a second. Now, this is just my opinion. If you go to talk to a girl and one of the first things she says to you is, "What do you want?" maybe rethink the whole thing. It's probably not off to a good start. Now, Watts would have been sitting over here on the hood of her car watching the whole thing, and the way that we can tell where she was parked is this lamppost on top of this cement block. She was parked right next to it. Watts watches as Keith asks out Amanda, and Amanda says yes, and Watts' heart breaks in two. After Amanda says yes to Keith, she crosses the street and walks down the sidewalk with her friend right here, right past Hardy, and lets him know that she said yes to Keith. Watts was sitting in front of a tree that was located right next to this building. Obviously not the same tree, but this is the right spot. Watts then notices that Keith is coming. He's walking right down this path. He approaches Watts and asks if he can borrow her car so he can give Amanda a ride home. Watts gives him the keys, and Keith walks off this way, and we get a good shot of that flagpole. As Amanda and Shane are walking away from the front of the school, Keith approaches Amanda and asks if he can give her a ride home. Amanda doesn't really want to go with Keith, but Shane ends up putting her on the spot, and Amanda agrees to ride home with him. She stands in the front of the school waiting for Keith, but when he doesn't show up, she gets frustrated and goes looking for him. So like I said, the same parking area that we see earlier in the movie, that's where Keith is trying to start the car. And that's when Amanda finds Keith not being able to start the car. She tells him she's got to go, and luckily her friend shows up in that beautiful Suzuki Samurai, and she gives Amanda and Keith a ride home. Come on, open the gate back up. My friend Keith is waiting. I need to give him a ride home. After finally realizing that Amanda doesn't really like him and Hardy doesn't really want to be his friend, Keith heads over to Watts's house. He crosses the street right here with the refinery in the background and heads up to the front door of Watts's home, which was right here but looks nothing like it did in the movie. The windows are different, the door is different, everything has changed on this house. Now realizing that all her friends have turned on her, Amanda comes walking out of the front door of the school right here with tears running down her face. And as she gets out to the front of the school, Hardy is leaning up against his Corvette, waiting to greet Amanda. You know, I gotta say, this guy played a pretty good scumbag, but I still don't know if he has anything over James Spader. Keith and Watts round the corner and come walking down this alley while Keith explains to Watts what his plan is, and they talk about how his dad's going to react. As they walk through the alley, once again, you can see the refinery in the background behind them. Watts pulls the car up and parks it right here in front of Amanda's house, pretty much lined up right here with the front gate. Keith walks up to the front door and then walks Amanda down to the car where Watts is waiting to open the door for Amanda. What's now Koi, this was once the fancy restaurant where Keith takes Amanda to have caviar. Of course, you can see it doesn't look anything like it did at the time of the movie, but Watts would have pulled into the driveway right past this lamppost and up to the front of the restaurant. The next stop on their date is the LA County Museum of Art, but a couple of years ago they tore down 4 buildings in this complex, and I believe that the building that we see them go to in the movie was one of those buildings that was demolished. The large venue where Keith and Amanda sit on the stage and he gives her the earrings before they end up sharing a kiss, that was filmed at the Hollywood Bowl. The final stop of their big date is Hardy's house, which is right here, and it still looks very similar to how it did at the time of filming, even though there are some more trees that are blocking the house. But if we come over on this side, you can see that it still looks very similar. It even still has that design on the front of the house. Watts pulls the car up and parks right here, which is not a parking space, but that's okay. Now in the movie, there's an old style lamp right there, which is no longer here, but there are some old style lamps in this neighborhood. So not sure if there really was one here and it's since been removed and replaced with a tree, or if they just put that lamp there for the movie. Keith and Amanda head inside the party, and just like we expected, Hardy and his friends begin to harass them. But just before things get out of control, Duncan busts in and saves the day. So let's not forget that Duncan is the real hero of this movie. I don't know if I'm the only one, but I get such a good feeling during that scene when Duncan busts in and then Hardy starts cowering to him.
I'm here to wipe the floor with your ass, and you know it, and everybody knows it, and you deserve it.
Did you know that on the credits of this movie, Duncan is just listed as Skinhead, even though his name is clearly Duncan and it's said multiple times throughout the movie? I mean, come on, give our hero some credit. Keith and Amanda come out of the house and they come walking down the driveway right here. And Keith notices Watts standing at the end of the driveway waiting for him. And for some reason, all of a sudden, after all these years, he now realizes that he's in love with Watts. They stand right here at the bottom of the driveway talking to Watts. She shakes hands with Amanda and says she's going to be on her way, and she heads off down the street that way. Amanda realizes that Keith is actually in love with Watts. She gives him back the diamond earrings and tells him to go after her. And right there on the other side of 6th Street, just beyond those trees, that's where Keith meets up with Watts, and we have the ending to our movie. Watts! It's right here in front of us where Watts stops and turns around, and there's a couple of ways that we can tell that this is the exact spot. First of all, that large white house in the distance, that can be seen behind Watts. Also, this manhole cover, she's standing right in front of this manhole cover. Now, this gas company truck is now blocking it, but on the other side of it, there's a wall that can also be seen behind Watts. And I'll step around the gas truck in a second and I'll show you. And there also used to be a couple of Y-shaped trees that can be seen in that scene. Those have just recently been cut down, so let me walk over here and show you on the other side of the truck. There's that wall that can be seen behind Watts, and then you can also see a couple of tree stumps from those trees that have just recently been cut down. It's a real bummer that those trees aren't there anymore, because if they were, this shot would match up exact. Keith runs up and kisses Watts and apologizes for not realizing sooner. He gives her the diamond earrings and they walk off together down the street that way, and that gives us the happy ending to our love story.